Good morning everyone and welcome to my desk. This is a video that I've been waiting for 3 years now to make, but I have not been allowed to talk about it because it's been wrapped up in litigation. But the litigation is settled now, so I have gotten the go-ahead from my lawyer to tell this story about why I'm 27 and have a bad back. But before we get to all that, I'd like to announce that I have partnered with veteran-owned small business GetEnterToWin.com to bring you all a chance to win this C5 Corvette Z06. Just click the link in the description or the pinned comment below, or go to go.getentertowin.com/100%Jake and buy a mug or a digital download, and you can have a chance to win this sweet Millennium Yellow stick shift ode to American excellence. Every entry helps a channel. The deadline to enter is March 22nd, so you don't have a lot of time. I recommend getting the mug because I came up with the design myself, and if you do get one, post a picture to Instagram or Twitter and give me a tag because I'd like to see y'all with my mug. So, back in 2019, I got this, a 1984 Honda Shadow 700. I traded a couple motorcycles that I had for it, and it was in really rough shape. It was actually in a whole bunch of boxes when I get it that required assembling. Stuff like the carburetors weren't there and they were dirty. Fuel pump, the fuel petcock, the coils, all kinds of stuff. So I had to kind of assemble this bike from parts to get it running, and it was just an endless battle. There were parts of the intake missing that could not be purchased, so I had endless problems with the carb tuning. It always had a bit of a surging issue on the highway that I could never quite figure out. And then I just had stuff like I was out riding it one day and the starter solenoid went bad, and these have a slipper clutch so they can't just be bump started. I had to find someone and borrow a screwdriver so I could jump the terminals. Then I got halfway home and the fuel pump died on me. It was one of those sorts of things. But I did like this bike, and I continued to modify it as I owned it and kind of turned it into kind of like, I really always liked the look of the Harley-Davidson FXDR, sort of like a sport bobber sort of thing, and this kind of looks like an FXDR if it was made in the 80s. I was pretty fond of it, and it was honestly pretty fun to ride. Finally, in October, after about 6 months of owning this thing, I got the jetting right and the carbs. I went out on the highway and it ran beautifully, so I headed straight to the local motorcycle hangout at a Quick Trip in downtown Wichita, where all my friends and I would meet up and go ride, and took this picture with a weird, ominous feeling. Like, I took the thumbs up and I was like, haha, boy, that's tempting fate. So my friends and I hopped on our bikes. One of them was on a 250cc Supermoto, and the other one was on, I think, a Ninja 250 or Ninja 300. Might have been a Ninja 250, but we went out for a ride, and we made it a whole 5 miles before there was a bit of an issue. So I'll put a screenshot of the intersection up now on Street View. This intersection has actually been redone a few times since here, so the lanes are a little bit different. But I was in the right of the middle lane, going straight, heading north. My buddy was to my left on his Supermoto, and my other buddy was to my right in the other lane, and we were sitting there at the red light, waiting to go, you know, kind of yelling at each other, you know, hey, how's it going, man, bike's running great, that sort of thing. So light turns green, and we all take off, and as I'm going through the intersection, through the left corner of my eye, I see my buddy on the Supermoto slam on his brakes, which yanks my attention to the side. Hey, are you deciding to turn left? What's going on? And as I look past him, I see a white vehicle. I believe it was a Ford Edge, but I did not get a very good look, entering the intersection. Now, we had the green to proceed north through the intersection. He definitely did not have a green to proceed east through the intersection. And I stare at this vehicle entering the intersection as I am well on my way through it. And, you know, motorcycles get moving pretty quickly. And so by the time my brain goes, oh, he's not stopping, and I grab brake, well, the 30-year-old brakes on the Honda Shadow didn't do a whole lot, and all I remember thinking is, dang, this guy's going to make me drop my bike. And then the SUV and I collided right about his front fender as he continued through the intersection, and I don't remember a lot after that. I kind of woke up on the ground. I sort of gathered my thoughts for a minute and started kind of going through a mental checklist like, okay, wiggle my toes. Okay, they're still there. But I didn't know if I had any broken bones or anything, so I decided to not try to move, which scared the heck out of my buddies. So I eventually, gave the thumbs up like, yeah, I'm still here. I don't know what's going on or where I am or where anything is. So I just kind of chilled on the ground for a while, and then an ambulance showed up, and they checked me out. Turns out no broken bones. They wanted to take me to the hospital, but all I could think of was, oh man, those ambulance rides are pretty expensive. I don't think I can afford that. I think I'll just go, go home and see how I'm doing. That was a mistake. I never actually saw what the car that hit me looked like after this, or the guy who did it. I don't remember a whole lot of what happened at this point. We got the bike collected and brought it to a friend's house, and I went home and took a whole bunch of pain medication. At this point, it wasn't really hurting yet, so I just kind of tried to sleep it off. So in the days after this, we started kind of dealing with the symptoms that had started to crop up. There were no broken bones, but I did end up with severe abdominal pain, upper and lower back pain, and what ended up being some pretty severe sciatica. And then a week later, I lost hearing in my left ear, which turned out to be an auditory concussion, which is apparently the delayed symptoms like that is fairly common, but it was definitely quite a whack to the head. And it's worth noting that I was wearing full gear during this, boots, jacket, and a helmet, and even with the helmet, I got an auditory concussion. So I've been pretty stringent about wearing helmets since then, because I definitely would not be here taking a whack like that to the head without one. 2 weeks after this, I actually had to take a trip to Texas, and it was driving, and I had to stop every hour or so, get out and stretch, because my back was just not up for that. So I did some physical therapy, which helped with the immediate issue of the crippling sciatica, but I still had upper and lower back pain. The abdominal pain kind of went away on its own. I think I might have, muscle tear or some internal bruising. It felt like a tear of some sort, but doctors never really commented on that. At this point, the medical diagnosis gets really kind of muddled and confused because of all of the different opinions from everyone I talked to. Got a whole bunch of MRIs, and eventually we decided to go with an epidural. I believe the idea here was that if we could get the swelling to go down, the swelling would stop self-perpetuating. So we did an epidural, and that actually did help. It was deeply unpleasant. I don't recommend it. But after a few months, that started to wear off. So then we did another epidural. Again, deeply unpleasant. That is a very large needle. Do not look at it when they offer to show it to you. That epidural made it worse, and so at this point I was real stiff and having a difficult time getting around, working on cars and stuff. All of this happened shortly after I decided to take YouTube seriously, so immediately I am wanting to work on cars, and I'm having difficulty doing so. So that was really annoying, and I can't really justify that as lost wages because YouTube is not a real job to, pretty much everybody. No one counts that as real. So after the second epidural made it worse, I think they did more MRIs, and I went to a different specialist, or they referred me to a different specialist. At this point, I'd just been seeing an orthopedic specialist of some description. So now we went to a different kind of specialist that I don't remember, and he recommended a spinal nerve ablation. Now, an ablation is a procedure where a nerve or nerve endings or whatever are ultrasonically burnt and cut. It's kind of like using a hot knife to cut something, and the burning sort of cauterizes it and keeps it from growing back as quickly. And the idea here was that small branching nerves coming off of the spine were agitated by swollen tissue, and the signals from those agitated nerves were perpetuating swelling. So if you cut the nerves, it doesn't hurt anymore, and the swelling will eventually go down because the tissue doesn't know that it's agitated, as I understand it, or maybe it was just, we've decided that the swelling isn't a big deal, If we can make the pain go away, then you'll be fine and it won't do any additional damage. I don't quite remember what was decided there, just that spinal nerve ablation was the next step. Before you get a spinal nerve ablation, there were 2 exploratory procedures, because you're cutting nerves around the spine, which is kind of a scary thing, so they want to make real sure that they're not cutting nerves that interfere with anything else, and they also want to make sure that disabling these nerves will in fact help the pain. So there are 2 exploratory procedures wherein they put in a targeted deadening agent that turns off the nerves for about 4 hours. And in my case, that is in 6 locations across 3 vertebrae. Sorry, 6 locations around 3 of my vertebrae. So either side of the spine by my 3 lower lumbar vertebrae. So that is 6 injections in the lower back. That was deeply unpleasant, but the results were fairly positive from the exploratory procedure. After the first one, I went and moved a bunch of boxes, which is something I would not have been able to do previously. And after the second one, I played hooky from work and went on a 4-hour motorcycle ride, which was also something that I would not have been able to do. So at this point, it was time for the final procedure, the actual spinal nerve ablation, which is 6 injections twice. First, they do a local numbing agent, then they go in with the big, angry, vibrating needle and actually cut the tissue. And I don't remember where it was along this process, but at one point I saw one of my doctors had actually written in his notes, I had been described as an extremely nervous individual. And I do have pretty bad anxiety about everything. So at this point, I was having a full-on panic attack in the waiting room, waiting for the final procedure. And bless him, the surgeon did not have very good bedside manners, because he came in, took a look at me, and said, "Oh, this isn't going to work. If I try to operate on you like this, you will end up paralyzed." That didn't help. So at this point, I'm kind of thinking, oh, maybe I'll get out of this and I won't have to do this today. But instead, he comes in with a nurse and he's like, okay, give him a dose of fentanyl. And I'm like, that thing that's been killing people? But, you know, medical versus recreational drugs. So they gave me some Fent and sent me into the operating procedure room, and I lay down. I'm sitting there for a while, and a nurse comes in. She goes, weren't you guys supposed to give him some fentanyl for this? And they're like, we did. And she's like, oh. Because I was still having a panic attack at this point. She's like, oh, give him some more, I guess. So they gave me some more, and what a horrible drug. That was absolutely awful to come down on. I've been in the hospital before, and they've given me opioids, morphine usually, but that was awful stuff. So eventually they got me calmed down enough to actually go through with the procedure, which was drawn out and horrible and lots of needles going very deep. Like, you aren't feeling pain, but you're feeling the fact that on a very deep and fundamental level, things are happening that are not supposed to, and no part of your body or your conscious or your subconscious is okay with that. I don't recommend spinal nerve ablations as a recreational activity. So they do the local numbing in 6 locations, and then they do the spinal actual nerve cut in 6 locations. So after this, I was able to go home. I think I was supposed to take it a little easy because there was still a lot of local numbing. I couldn't feel any of my lower back at this point. And this procedure did not help at all, and it actually ended up with some fairly negative side effects. I ended up with hypersensitive skin in my lower right back, and there were actually some meds that they gave me later on to help with that, but for a while there, my shirt touching my lower back felt like pins and needles. It was very bizarre. So at this point, we talked to a surgeon, and I gotta reiterate here, every single person I talked to had a different opinion about my back. Some people were like, oh, it's just some swelling. Some people were like, oh, there's a loss of fatty tissue around these branching nerves. And other people said, and I swear the surgeon looked at my MRI and said, oh, your disc is completely gone at this point. But then, in the deposition from him to my lawyer later on, it said something completely different. So maybe I imagined the whole thing. I don't know and I don't understand, and it's a little bit disconcerting when your mobility is at risk, when none of the doctors seem to be remotely certain about what is actually going on with you. I mean, it seemed like a fairly basic structural thing, but no one knew. So I guess medical science just isn't quite as sure about spines as I expected them to be. So the surgeon was thinking that I would need surgery to fuse two of my lower lumbar vertebrae. Unfortunately, I live in the United States of America, so my insurance was garbage, and I would have to come up with the $8,000 insurance deductible on my own and deal with a potential 7 weeks off work and creating YouTube content to recover. So the surgery was not going to happen anytime soon for me. Currently, I'm actually just doing physical therapy and some basic pain medications, muscle relaxants, and steroids, and that seems to actually be doing fairly well. Again, someone with a completely different opinion, my physical therapist is pretty sure that simply moving and living in a slightly different way will actually mitigate my pain to an extent where any structural issues that exist will not actually pose a significant detriment on my larger life. So that's where we're at right now. It's actually going quite well. I'm pretty confident that I can avoid surgery at this point. So yay! This physical therapist is actually a rock star. He's impressive. But throughout all this, there was the actual lawsuit going on, and I'm not a lawyer. Obviously, I have no idea what any of this really means. I'm just kind of trying to remember things. I could be completely wrong about anything I say here. It's not fact. Don't take it as such. I don't really love the idea of a first reaction to an accident being to sue the other person. But in this case, my insurance situation was kind of rocky, so my issue was no witnesses came forward immediately after the accident, so in a no-fault state, I was pinned with shared fault for the accident, which hit my insurance and skyrocketed my rates. So in my mind, a lawsuit would serve as a way to tell the insurance company, no, I was not at fault, this lawyer said so, please stop overcharging me even more for my car insurance. Now, as it turned out, that didn't matter because the lawsuit took so long that the accident rolled off my insurance in the interim. Go figure. The actual lawsuit process was extremely tedious. It was a whole lot of interviews and depositions, and in the middle of all of it, there was a pandemic that just delayed absolutely everything. The main thing was the defendant's lawyers wanted to hold off on everything until they knew for sure how, if my back was fixed or not. So, the 2 years or so it took between my first MRI and the spinal nerve ablation was more or less had the lawsuit at a standstill. And then eventually the defendant lawyer wanted me to see one of their doctors to get their opinion and someone that they could call to the stand in court and blah, blah, blah. That never ended up happening. They kept saying they were going to do that, and they never did. It was just a whole bunch of stalling, and the judge just kind of allowed it, so there was really nothing to do. And we pushed for trial instead of a settlement, which is kind of a two-way street, because their settlement offers were, frankly, insultingly low. But the downside there is that these sorts of things, at least in Kansas, are a jury trial. And here's why that's a problem. I live in Kansas. This is the Midwest, and people in the Midwest are of a very certain sort of mindset about lawsuits and accident victims. They don't want people to get a handout, bootstrapped, etc. So you start at a disadvantage as an accident victim. They don't want to give you a huge payday because reasons. They don't think that getting hit by a car and potentially ruining your life justifies a large payout. Furthermore, I was on a motorcycle, so I had a further inherent jury bias to overcome, because when people think motorcycle, they either think of those loud, obnoxious Harley-Davidsons that go flying past their house at all hours of the night, or flying down the highway and not wearing a helmet and blasting Born to Be Wild, or they think of college students and crotch rockets doing 140 miles an hour down US 54 with no regard for anybody. So right off the bat, I faced an enormous hurdle in court of just proving that I'm not a piece of shit. And even after that, I'd have to prove that I was not at fault. Now, obviously, I was not fully at fault, and I would have no problem proving that, but my lawyer informed me that things are rarely that cut and dry. Even in the most obvious settlement imaginable, where someone is rear-ended by someone else, juries will often find an excuse to pin some amount of the blame on the victim. Oh, you could have just not entered the intersection so quickly. And of course the defendants were trying to claim that we jumped the red light or whatever, convenient excuse they could think of. So there's a lot of he said, she said, even though there was a witness that came forward later who had called 911 and who we were able to get a hold of. At most, from a jury trial, we would have gotten $70,000 to $80,000 awarded, but we would have had to pay for doctors to show up and testify, which is about $10,000 per appearance. And if it went to court, the lawyers get a larger cut than if we settle out of court. So the flip side of that is the defendant would have also had to pay their doctors for a case that they would have inevitably lost anyway, and then they would have had no way to recoup any of that money or anything like that. So eventually they dropped the incredibly insulting settlement offers, and we started to make counter offers because this had drug on for far too long. And we actually ended up settling about 2 weeks ago. And we did settle for less than we would have got in court, but I ended up getting the same amount in my pocket. It was just a lot less going to the lawyer and doctors to make an appearance. And even then, what I got is an absolute pittance. It was less than, a third or a quarter of what we would have got in court actually going in my pocket. It was enough to buy my Corvette and put a little bit in savings as well. So I guess there's that. All it takes to get a Chevy Corvette is to get hit by a truck and then deal with a strung out 3-year lawsuit. But if you want a super cool Corvette, you can get entered to win one simply by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment below, or by going to go.getenteredtowin.com/100%Jake and buying a mug or a digital download. Every entry helps the channel, and it is a lot less painful than getting hit by an SUV. The deadline to enter is March 22nd at 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I'd like to thank getenteredtowin.com for partnering with the channel, and I'd like to thank you guys for helping to support it. Thanks for watching.